Truth arise, voices bold, faith alive, relevant words for such a time, empowered hearts, aligned in Christ.
Hello and welcome to Unmute the Mic. Our August theme continues from silence to significance. But with this episode, we're talking about Own It. Your story is not a liability. Now, what if the part of your story that you have been trying your hardest to hide or avoid, what if that is the part of the story that you need to share so that the very people you need to help can hear it? What if the chapter that you thought disqualified you actually developed you with compassion, courage, and wisdom and discernment? Powerhouse. There's a difference between something happening to you and allowing what happened to you define you. You are not only what you survived, you are not only the mistake that you made, you are not only the relationship that ended. You're not only the season when you lost yourself, you are also the woman who learned, who rebuilt, and keeps it going, and the woman who keeps deciding what the next chapter will say. So today we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about what it means to own your story without allowing your story to own you. Because your story is not a liability. It may be part of the authority that you already currently carry. Welcome to Unmute the Mic, where we have real conversations that matter, relevant, empowering, authentic, lasting, and legacy building. I'm Dr. Rita Reneé. And for this month of August, we are moving from silence to significance. The last time that we talked about the cost of living on mute and identifying the rooms where you have been turning down your own volume. Now, today, we're talking about the next step because sometimes the reason we stay muted is not connected to a story that we have not completely owned. So, Powerhouse, let's get into it. Owning your story, it does not mean approving of everything that has happened to you. It does not mean pretending that the pain did not matter. It does not mean excusing people who hurt you. And it certainly doesn't mean that telling everybody every private detail of your life. You don't need to do that. Owning your story means that you stop running from the truth of your journey. You can say, yes, that happened. Yes, it affected me. Yes, I had to heal. And yes, I've learned some things the hard way. And no, that chapter does not get to write the ending. And some of us have spent years carrying certain experience like evidence against ourselves. Because this happens, I must be broken. Because I stayed, I must be weak. Because that was a big mistake I made. Surely it disqualified me. Because I started over, I must be behind. Maybe because that relationship ended, I must have failed. But Powerhouse, what happened in that part of your story? You you gained your voice. It does not automatically get you to become part of your identity just because it's part of your story. You can acknowledge the chapter without allowing the chapter to become your name. And one of the biggest reasons for shame is simply just tells us that our experience was something different. Shame would tell us if people knew, they probably would look at me differently. So we become skilled in showing only the polished versions of ourselves. We show the title, the degree, the business, the stage, the family photos, the accomplishments, but we hide the rebuilding, the uncertainty. We hide the seasons when we did not feel strong. And now I want you to hear me clearly. Everything does not belong online. Every story does not belong on the stage, and everyone has not earned access to your private life. There is wisdom in privacy, but privacy and shame are not the same thing. Privacy says this part of my story is valuable and I will share it in wisdom. Shame says, this part of my story makes me less valuable, so I must hide it. Privacy is a boundary, but shame is a prison. And some of us have called it privacy when fear has really been managing the door. This is important because coming off mute doesn't mean telling everyone everything. Ownership and oversharing are not the same thing. You can be honest and still have boundaries, and you can tell the truth without giving away every detail. You can acknowledge an experience without identifying every person involved. But before you share part of your story, ask yourself, why am I sharing this? Am I trying to teach, encourage, connect, help people understand something differently? Or am I sharing because I need the audience to validate me? There is nothing wrong with needing support, but every audience is not a place where your story should be processed. Some experience need to be healed privately before they can be communicated publicly. Ask yourself, who needs to hear this? Every story is not in every room. It's not qualified for every room. The way that you share something with trusted friends may be different than the way you share it in a keynote, a podcast, a book, a business setting, or a ministry environment. You need to ask, what is the lesson? Your story should lead somewhere. What did you learn? What became clear? And how did the experience change the way you led, communicate, made decisions, establish boundaries, and serve others? You do not have to tell the whole story to tell the truth. That's wisdom. So stop letting the experience name you. And here is where many of us get stuck. We turn experiences in identities. There is a difference between saying, I'm experienced rejection. I've experienced that before, haven't you? And I am unwanted. There's a difference between saying, I made a really bad decision and I cannot trust myself. There's a difference between saying that my business failed and I'm a failure. And there's definitely a difference between I went through a season when I lost my voice. I've been there. And saying, I have nothing worth saying. One describes what happened, the other tells you who you are. And if you repeat the wrong identity long enough, you begin to make decisions from it. You stop applying, you stop asking, you stop trusting, you stop trying, and you stop believing that there could be something different. Powerhouse, be careful about turning a pain season into a permanent name. An experience can't explain you without defining you. And you have experienced rejection. We all have. But rejection is not our name. We may have experienced failure. Failure is not our name. And even being silenced. But silence is not our identity. You may have a broken heart. I know I have. But brokenheartedness is not where your story has to end. You can get to decide what the story means going forward. You can change every fact. You you can do that, but why would you? Because we cannot control what another person did. We can't control or rewrite the past, but we can decide what meaning we want giving it going forward. And maybe you once said, I wasted all those years. And what if the new language was, I now understand my value of time? Maybe you've said, I should have known better. Who hasn't said that? But maybe your new language is, I know differently now, and I will use that as what I know now. Maybe you said that rejection proved that I was not good enough. What if we just said the rejection taught me that the place of my worth is not someone else's decision to make? And I can go on and on. But powerhouse, starting over doesn't always mean starting from nothing. You start with experience, you start with lessons and wisdom and clarity, and you start with things that you did not know the first time. You may be beginning again, but you are not beginning empty. That changes the conversation because your story can become wisdom. And here is what I want you to understand: your story is not powerful simply because something happened to you. Experience by itself doesn't automatically create wisdom. Wisdom comes when you examine the experience and then said, you know what? What happened? What did I believe during the season? What did I ignore? What did I learn? What would I do differently? And how did this experience change the way I lead now? How I love, how I communicate, how I make decisions, and then take what you learned and use it responsibly. That is where lived experience becomes wisdom. And wisdom can become leadership. Maybe you understand boundaries different because you know what happened when you did not have them. And maybe you understand that rebuilding is necessary because you had to start again. Maybe you recognize that someone else's silence because you remember what it felt like to lose your voice. And maybe you have a deeper compassion because life forced you to stop judging the situation you had never experienced. Your story can make you more human, more discerning, compassionate, responsible, effective. But first, you have to stop being ashamed that you have a story. Your story brings a personal connection. And I know what it means to have a chapter in my life that could have became reasons for me to become silent. And there were experiences I never would have chosen. But there's a season when I had to rebuild, moments when I had to ask myself, will this become the thing that silences me forever, or will I allow what I learned to become something to serve not only myself, but others? And over time, I've learned that I did not have to pretend that difficult things never happened to me. I could acknowledge them without living inside of them. I could say, this happened to me, this affected me, this is where I needed to heal, this hurt me. And now I have wisdom, and I didn't have that wisdom before. I also learned that there's a difference between speaking from the wound and speaking from wisdom. And when you're speaking only from the wound, the story may still control you. When you are beginning to speak from wisdom, you can acknowledge that the pain happened without making the listener responsible for healing it. Your scar can become evidence of healing instead of the evidence that you should hide. And that is a different way to carry your story. So we're going to do an exercise, and I want you to do this in your spare time. Take a quiet moment. And this is something that's very practical that you can do. I want you to create what I call a 3-sentence story. You are going to complete 3 simple statements. And here's the first one: I lived through. Here's an example. You do not need all the details when you're doing this. For example, I lived through a season when I lost confidence in myself. I lived through a relationship that caused me to question my value. I lived through a business setback. I lived through a season of grief. I lived through years of putting everyone else first. Then the second part of the sentence, or the second sentence, is going to be I taught, not I, it taught me. So it taught me. Okay. So the first one we have, I lived through. The second one is it taught me. Now, this is where wisdom appears, right? It taught me that being needed is not the same thing as being valued. It taught me that boundaries are necessary. It taught me that silence does not always keep the peace. It taught me that another person's inability to recognize my value does not determine my worth. It taught me that starting over is not starting from nothing. And then the final and third sentence is because of that experience. Okay? So the first sentence is I lived through. The second is it taught me. And then the third is because of that experience, I now. And this is where the story moves from purpose and action. It moves you from all of that taught you. Now you're moving into purpose and action. Because of that experience, I now communicate my boundaries clearly. Because of that experience, I now keep women, I help women recognize their value. Because of that experience, I now use my voice in rooms where I once would have remained silent. Now we're going to put an example all together. We're going to put three of these sentences together to create that three-sentence story. I lived through a season when I lost confidence in my voice. It taught me that silence does not always protect you. Because of that experience, I now help women use their voice with clarity and courage. That is the story. No oversharing, no 10-minute explanation, no shame, no, it's just a lesson, just your experience, just your impact. Now, here's my challenge to you. Within the next 72 hours, I want you to complete the three-sentence story. I want you to write it, then say it out loud, and then I want you to record yourself saying it on your phone. Listen to yourself. Pay attention to where you hesitate, where you start to minimize, where you start to rush because you're trying to get through it, or which part is the hardest to say. And then ask yourself, what would it sound like if I told this story without shame? You do not have to publish it. You don't have to share it to the world. This exercise begins with you because before you can communicate your story with confidence and even someone else, you first need to hear it from your own voice and own it. So before you move on, I want you to embrace that three-sentence story and own it. As we close, remember these three things. Ownership is not oversharing. You can tell the truth and still have boundaries. Your experience is not your identity. What happened to you does not get to become your permanent name. And you healed and gained wisdom. When you examine what happened to you, identify the lesson, and use it responsibly, your story can become something that serves others. Your action this week is your three-sentence story. I lived through, it taught me. Because of that experience, I now. Powerhouse, you do not have to drag your story behind you like evidence of everything that went wrong. You can carry it differently now. You can carry it as the evidence that you've learned, the evidence that you grew, the evidence that you survived and rebuilt. Evidence that the chapter that tried to silence you did not have the final word. Your story is not the evidence against you. It may be the evidence of the authority that you carry. And you are now allowed to honor the woman you were becoming as you are called to be. And you are allowed to say, that happened to me, but it does not own me. In our next conversation that we'll be having, we're going to be talking about the own it to word it. Our topic is going to be worded. Say what you mean and name your value because you can own your story internally and still minimize yourself when it's time to communicate it. We are going to talk about the words that we use that weaken the authority and how to stop apologizing before we speak and how to clearly communicate our value without becoming arrogant. Because once you own your story and own who you are, you have to learn how to put the language around it, what you carry. So, Powerhouse, do not leave this conversation inspired and never be changed. Take this lesson, own your story, and use what you learn. Come off mute, come out of the shadows, off the sidelines, and show up in the rooms that need to hear your voice. Guess what? The mic is on. Your voice matters, and now it is time to unmute. So until next time, unmute.